Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Stephen Long. Welcome to the X Factor, the podcast for leaders by leaders. Today, we have a special guest, Colonel Ryan Hill of the United States Air Force. When I started this podcast, I had a goal of bringing a diversified viewpoint about leadership and performance. So welcome, Ryan. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Doc, and thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for being here. So tell me who you are and what you do.
All right. Well, I guess that the simple answer is I'm a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and I'm currently a military professor at the Naval War College. Give a little bit more context to that, just for your listeners, so they understand kind of the perspectives and the biases that I have bringing into the conversation. I am a Christian. That colors my worldview and a lot of my values. I'm a husband of 20 years, married to a wonderful lady and my best friend. I'm a father of a teenage daughter and an officer now in the Air Force for 22 years. I will mention that the views I express in this program do not necessarily mirror those of the United States Air Force, the Department of the Navy, or the Department of Defense. So caveat that. What do I do? Mostly, Doc, I do what I'm told. And, as I said it jokingly, but I think, there's a lot of truth in that, not just because I'm in the military, but, for those who don't know, an officer's career sometimes is fairly diverse, and mine certainly has been. I started off my career as an A-10 pilot. That's the Warthog, flying close air support missions. Did a couple of deployments, one with the 82nd Airborne in the Army. So I was rucking around Eastern Afghanistan, doing convoy support, things like that. Just planning and controlling air operations for those guys. Another deployment as a pilot, again in Afghanistan, supporting coalition ground troops. I spent about 9 or 10 years in the A-10, and then I transitioned. I actually went to a couple of Army schools, learned to speak Army, and also learned joint and military planning. I used that in a role in the Republic of Korea. I was the lead operational planner for U.S. forces in Korea for a couple of years. So quite a bit different experience than flying my airplane around, but a great experience. After I was done with that tour, I came back to the U.S. And helped stand up a squadron at Moody Air Force Base in Georgia. We were flying A-29s. It's not in the Air Force inventory. We were actually using the aircraft to train Afghan maintainers and pilots in the A-29 light attack aircraft and helping them stand up their combat air force. Started off as the director of operations there, working with an incredible team across the Air Force and really across the world to stand up that squadron, and then became the commander, did that a couple years. When I gave up command, I came here, Newport, Rhode Island, to the Naval War College. And I've been here teaching for the last couple of years in the College of Ethics. I direct a program for a graduate certificate in leadership and ethics as well. So yeah, I've had a fairly diverse career. What do I do? Well, I've been an Air Force pilot, an Army planner, and now a Navy professor. That's I do what I'm told.
It certainly seems you've gone through some transitions. And maybe before I get into the next question, maybe you can just speak to about that, transitioning from from an individualist, being for the people who don't know out there, I do know the A-10. I'm not sure about the A-29, and you can obviously speak to it. That's a single pilot airplane. So you're up there all alone doing your own thing. But then over the course of your 22-year career, you've transitioned into leadership. And I'm just wondering, what can you tell the listeners how you made that transition?
Sure. Yeah, in the A-10, you're right. You're up there to a degree. You're by yourself. You're in the cockpit, and you're right. There are, even in the trainers, right? There is no trainer. It's just a single seat. So your very first flight in the A-10 is solo. But you're up there with a wingman. There is a certain amount of leadership it's almost technical in the way that it comes about. I remember in pilot training, looking at looking at people flying formation at Columbus Air Force Base, and they were coming back into the pattern, and these airplanes are so close to each other. How in the world do they do that without hitting each other, right? But really, it's a matter of training. You start off and you're all over this guy, and the next thing you know, you feel like you're pretty proficient. And I flew back in the days of the T-37 before the T-6 came along, and I remember after 6 months feeling like, man, I'm good at this, right? And then they put you in a T-38, and I stink again, right? And then I started to get pretty good at that in another 6 months, and then I leave that aircraft and start flying the A-29, and behold, I stink again. But it's really a matter of repetition, right? It's habit forming, and to a degree, it's training. There's kind of some conflicting views. I teach in behavioral sciences right now, and some conflicting views about the way that we make decisions and the best way to go about that. Some people really ascribe to more of an intuitive view. Um, even Clausewitz talked about something called coup d'oeil, right? That at a glance, to be able to see the battlefield at a glance and sum it all up and know what to do. And to a degree, that's what we train to do as pilots. You get so good at flying the airplane that it's kind of like driving a car. You're not really thinking about what you're doing with regard to flying, and you're able to dedicate most of your thinking and your conscious thought to accomplishing the mission. And most of that is very time compressed. It's very urgent and requires quick decision making. And so we put ourselves through pretty intense training to be able to do that, to be able to think quickly, to have seen those scenarios before and recognize those scenarios, and then implement whatever measures we need to overcome obstacles, problems. Right? It was all very time compressed. And so, when you think about the intuition piece, certainly for that level, in that place, it's applicable, right? It's something that we need. It's necessary. There's just not time to do it any other way. The reflective type thinking, there's no place for that really in a cockpit, in a close air support fight or any other fight for that matter. There's just not a lot of time to kind of give things deep thought.
That's
Now, when we transition, I'm sorry, when we transition to higher levels of leadership, one thing that I recognize is that now I'm not in my technical field. I'm no longer necessarily the expert. So, when I became the director of operations and then the commander of a squadron, now I'm dealing with 5 or 6 different fields, not my own. There's maintenance and logistics and a lot of other factors coming in, and I don't know those fields, right? And I think there's a tendency sometimes when we're going from one realm of leadership to the next to carry over that sense of urgency. That we're the leader and everybody expects us to make the decisions. There's that. I mean, to a degree, it's true. There is that pressure, like you're the guy, and you're supposed to have all the answers. But the fact is, it's not true, right? That we all, even if we have perfect knowledge, we don't have perfect processing, perfect perspective, right? There's a lot of different perspectives out there that really make a difference, and we're limited in the way that we perceive. So it's really important, I think, to be able in that transition to get rid of that kind of false sense of urgency and to realize that we do have time, right? We have time to ask questions, and maybe we don't. In certain situations, perhaps we don't. But the higher we move up in an organization, I think the more time we have to make the really big, important decisions. And so, kind of slowing time down a little bit, and being able in those moments to suspend your own biases, your own perspectives, and humbly look around the room and ask people like, what do you think? Right. And truly listen to them. And I've heard you talk about this before, that empathetic listening. It's not just that I'm listening to refute. I'm not just listening to be kind to you, to let you say something, right? I'm actually listening because I care what you have to say, and I'm actually going to consider it. And I think that's a huge part of the transition is, you go from being an expert and somebody that can make quick, valid decisions in very specific circumstances to someone who is dealing with a lot less predictability and a lot more complexity. and it requires something greater, right? And so it requires us as leaders to really kind of slow down, open up, think more complexly, be able to talk to people at a level where we're able to take their perspective, their understanding, and add it to our own, so that we're not facing this complex system with a simple mind, right? And a very closed, one-dimensional mind. We're actually able to open up our minds and deal with environmental complexity with to a degree mental complexity.
You just spoke to a number of issues there. And first, I want to talk about that habit formation. Is that you do it so often and do it so many times that when you actually get to do it, you don't really have to think about it. And in psychology, we call that the trust mindset. You just trust yourself and you just let it happen. But then that transition to leadership. And this is something I think really important for the younger professionals out there, is that, you're making a lot of decisions, but at this point, you're actually learning how to make decisions. And something my father taught me is that, the higher you go in an organization, the fewer decisions you have to make, but the greater consequence they have.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah. And so when you're younger, you learn, really how to make those decisions. And it's basically a laboratory where you get to make a lot of them. Okay. And some turn out better than the others, but through self-reflection, you start to figure out how you actually made the good ones. So when you get to senior positions like yourself at this point in your career, now you can really take your time and consider all the different factors that affect the situation and look at it from multiple perspectives, not only from your own mindset, but also getting the perspectives of other people, just to check your own biases. And I think what you're saying, Ryan, is just absolutely crucial for not only for senior leaders like yourself, but also for younger leaders.
Absolutely. And you talk about habit formation, and we learn to make decisions through the habits that we form, and especially at lower levels. But as you in that transition, we've also built up a habit of making quick decisions, right? And that's one that may not be that great, right? There's a time and place, absolutely.
Yeah.
But if that is our habit, that we make decisions and we make them quickly and we trust them, that the higher up we get, yes, the fewer decisions we make, the more impact they are, and typically the more complex that decision is, right? And the more ambiguity that there is in that decision. And so it probably deserves a little bit more time than the decisions that we were making as a junior leader.
Yeah, but that whole process of change in your career mirrors this of going from novice to expert, novice to expert, novice to expert. As you climb that ladder, is very important, because then you begin to reflect upon, well, how did I actually do that? And so it actually slows down, that decision-making process on purpose because of that reflection. And so your career has really been just a model for so many people out there of, okay, this is, what do you guys say at the Naval War College? What got me here?
Yeah, what got you here may not get you there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you learn over time, especially when you start anew, you learn that maybe you weren't as good as you thought you were, right? And that's important, right? It's an important lesson to learn and to take with you. There's some humility that comes in that, and like, oh wow, like I thought I was pretty good, and here I am starting all over again, right? So absolutely, it's like eating some humble pie from time to time.
Well, Ryan and I have a common interest, is the Air Force Academy football program, and I would tell the coaches, if you always do what you always done, you'll always get what you always got.
That's right.
So many people get wrapped up into that one strength that they believe is their strength, right? That self-identity, and they fail to take it, or they fail to actually challenge that when they get into another position, with greater responsibility.
That's right.
Yeah. So let me get back to some of this. Let me ask you, what is the best aspect of being a leader?
Best aspect. Gosh, this is there's a lot of great things to be a leader, right? And there's a lot of bad things. There's some burdens that come along with it. I shared this story not long ago. I was speaking at a Naval War College graduation, and I've used this illustration in class before. It's a true story. So when COVID kicked off, like everybody, we were just looking for some excuse to get out of the house, right? And my dog was in heaven, so we took our dog for a walk 3 or 4 times a day, right? Um, and so one day, my daughter and I are taking her dog for a walk, and it's just this 13-pound little white puffy thing, right? And so we're taking the dog for a walk, and it's pretty confident. She's almost prancing out there in front of us walking, and but every time we get to a fork in the road or some sort of intersection, the dog slows down, starts looking over his shoulder, like, so do I go left or do I go right here? And I brought that up to my daughter, and I called her attention to it. And she said something I thought was pretty profound. She said, "Yeah, I think she likes to lead. No, I'm sorry. I think she likes to be out front, but she doesn't want to lead." Right? I think she likes to be out front, but she doesn't want to lead. And I think that's true. Being out front is cool, right?
Mhm.
Like there's something to that. And I've heard you talk about before that there's positional power, right? And when we're put in a position of power, it's like it's an achievement. It's an award of sorts. If we think about it that way. But I think that's kind of a cheap, if you will, satisfaction of leadership. I think the real satisfaction of leadership is in the leading, right? It's not in the position itself. It's in the leading. It's in the hard work, and there's something much more satisfying and rewarding that comes from the hard work of leadership than just being in the positional power. I think one of the greatest things about being a leader is working towards something that's worthwhile, something that's meaningful. And Simon Sinek talks about the why of leadership. What is it that we're trying to do? Um, I think that's one thing, and then the other part that's just equally important is seeing the team come together to accomplish it. Right? When you're out in front, right?
Mhm.
That's one thing, but leading your team into pulling together and working together and sharing that experience, right? Not just having people do what you want in order to accomplish something, but we as a team accomplish it together, right? We share that experience of accomplishing something that's worthwhile. I think that's the greatest aspect of being a leader, right? It's that feeling, it's that deeply satisfying piece of leadership, and I think what calls a lot of us to it, right? That I desire to be a leader because of this, right? It's a higher calling. It's something that's worthwhile, and it's leading people to do something greater than any one of us could accomplish on our own.
It's providing that sense of purpose.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
So is there a difference between the best aspect of being a leader and what you see as the primary leadership responsibility?
Um, yeah. So I think I think there's a central piece of both of them, right? And that's the mission itself, right? When we talk about the best aspect, it's to a degree, it's accomplishing that mission. And that's an interesting question, the way that you framed it there, because I think there's a dynamic there between the people that we lead and the satisfaction of seeing people succeed in something, and the thing that we're trying to achieve, or that sense of purpose, right? And we talk about this in the Air Force quite a bit, and the military at large, I think. Um, is it mission first or is it people first, right? And there's a saying that I've heard that tries to kind of equalize that a little bit. Was mission first and people always, and I kind of like that. That resonates to a degree, but I think that there's also another way of looking at this, maybe where it's not necessarily a priority. I think sometimes when we prioritize things that way, we tend to sacrifice one for the other, right? So if I put the mission first, then I'm willing to sacrifice people in order to accomplish the mission. Or if I put people first, maybe I jeopardize the mission because I've sacrificed it in some way or neglected it. Um, I think it may be better, and I try to work through this. if you think about like a wagon wheel, right? And in the middle is the mission. This is the thing that we are an organization to do this. This is our why. This is our purpose. This is our reason for being, right? That's at the hub. And all the spokes that come out, right? Those are the things that make it happen. And one of those is people, and you could think, well, you got people, equipment, there's training, your finances, your communications, all those things. These are parts of your mission. These are the things that need your attention, certainly, to make the mission happen. But they're always, right, relative to the mission. They're always looked at in the context of what we're trying to do. And at any one point, they could be the priority, right? Depending upon the situation. And we always want to stay in balance with the mission. And so I think, when we're talking about what is your primary responsibility, I think I think there's a central responsibility that we have to accomplish what we're set out to do, what we're meant to do, what the organization is built for. I think that's the central responsibility that we have. But on any given day, we may really have to prioritize one thing over another in order to accomplish that, right? And so there's tons of responsibilities that we have, but I think that they all have to be viewed with respect in the context of accomplishing the overall mission, right? And so, there's something I used to tell my squadron, and it's not as quippy as mission first people always, but I told them, I will absolutely take care of you to the best of my ability. I will take care of you. I will take care of your family within the context of accomplishing the mission, right? Now that's not very quippy. It's not something you're going to put on a poster in a squadron or something like that, but I think it kind of communicates that point. And I think they appreciated that, right? To realize that we are all a part of accomplishing this mission, right? And those other responsibilities will come along with it within the context and with respect to accomplishing that mission, which is something we're all set out to do.
Yeah, what you're alluding to is what I call paradox management. Is that paradox is basically fusing two ends of apparently two polar opposites. And so people are the mission. And what you said was very insightful, is that on any given day, those factors can change. Right?
Yeah.
So we want to accomplish the mission, and we want to get do the best thing for our people. Right? But depending on the day, we have to integrate these different variables that come in, right? And it may be different on Tuesday than it was on Saturday.
Right.
So, but how that the leader integrates that, and as long as the leader is constantly communicating with with their people, then they're up to date. And because they, by this time they know, they know that the leader is just not, a mercenary. Okay, that they're just going to sacrifice the people for the mission.
Exactly.
Right. Is that they built up that bank account of trust, and they know that the leader is going to do the right thing for them, right? But they also recognize that the leader has this complex job, right, of surveying the environment and seeing what the variables are, right? What they can control and what they can't control, right? And then basically putting it into that calculus. So
I think you're right, and that trust that you've built up is them understanding that you are not going to sacrifice them without good cause, right? So I am not unnecessarily going to put you through more than you need to be put through, right? I will do my best to take care of you, right? And I think they know that, right? That's that trust that you're talking about there, that you've built up with them, that I am considering you in all these decisions, right? I'm not just throwing you to the side and don't care whether or not you're working extra hours for no reason, for example. That's the trust that we have to build up in our organizations to be able to communicate that effectively and to execute it effectively.
Yeah. I've been watching some documentaries recently, about World War II and some other things. And once those fascist regimes go down, the entire country is just so elated, because they know they've been being used, because the fascists, and those type of leaders are just willing to give up anything for the mission. for their personal mission, right? Rather than, trying to, manage that complexity between those two, between those two variables.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. What advice would you give to other leaders regarding leadership effectiveness?
We've already kind of talked about some of this, I think, but when, well, there's a lot of things that we could talk about, when it comes to leadership effectiveness. I will talk about leading in complexity. I just had an article published in the Journal of Character and Leader Development on this topic. And so I'll kind of share the underlying premise of the article, because I think it really speaks to leadership effectiveness within different environments of complexity. And so what I did was I kind of broke it out into three categories of leaders. And I used the illustration of a desk leader, a conference table leader, and a round table leader. And the desk leader is somebody that works in a fairly benign, status quo, non-dynamic organization, right? So you think maybe of a factory floor or something like that. If everything, if you expect that everything is going to maintain status quo, that's kind of the environment that we're talking about. And a desk leader is somebody that they direct people, right? That's their communication style. They're very direct. You kind of picture somebody sitting at a desk and giving orders across the table at someone that's standing up in their office, right? Mm-hmm. And all they really expect is compliance, right? The desk leader is somebody that, they are an expert. I will tell you and make you an expert, and now you just go and do the thing that I tell you to do. Leadership style is generally micromanage it, so I'm the expert, so let me over shoulder you if necessary, and then feedback comes in the form of critique. Like, did you do it right or did you not? Not a lot of instruction required, right? You just need to do it this way. That's it. Compliance. Now we typically think, well, that's not a very good leader, right? Like in our minds, like, I don't want to work for that person, but that doesn't mean they can't be effective, right? They could be effective given the right environment, where things don't change, and you just, like, you're just very predictable output versus the input, right? Now, more of an aspirational leader is somebody that we think about as a conference table leader, and I think this is somebody that, I grew up in the Air Force. This is kind of your model leader. It's the person that sits at the head of the table, and instead of just being directive, they're inspiring. This is an inspirational leader, and they have great ideas and great thoughts, and that's the reason they're there, right? That's the reason they're the leader, because they have these great ideas and great thoughts and have a lot of experience. And so they inspire. And what they're expecting instead of compliance is buy-in, right? I want you at my table to buy into the concepts that we're teaching, that we're propagating here in this organization. And instead of just micromanaging, they delegate, right? So each person has their job. You go out, you do this, and that's the expectation. And then for feedback, it's actually constructive criticism, right? Like, I want you to get better. This is what we did wrong. Here's what we need to do right next time, right? And so if you think about it, that's the leadership I think most of us were taught, and it's kind of held up as this is it. This is the way that you need to be as a leader. And the problem there, and it's great. I mean, that works in most organizations, I think, right? I think the problem is when you get into a very complex environment. Again, you as the leader, you know a lot. You're in that position because you know a lot, but you don't know everything, right? You don't know everything. And your scope of responsibility has grown. And probably most of your listeners, they find themselves in this position where the scope of responsibility is well beyond their own expertise, right? And so even if I know everything, again, I'm still limited in my own processing. I'm still limited in my own perspective. And so I'm limited in the way that I can approach the complex environment that I'm dealing with. And so a roundtable leader is one that operates at a different level with regard to mental complexity, right? It's not just the ideas that I have that I'm bringing forth and I expect your buy-in. Instead, they're more collaborative, right? So they're sitting at a round table, and what I'm looking for is I'm looking for your input. And Admiral Scott Swift came and spoke to us at the Naval War College one day, and he said, who's the smartest person in the room? Well, you retired 4-star are probably the smartest person in the room. And he's like, no, that's the problem, right? That's the problem. I'm not. and I need your input. But because I'm here, sometimes I don't get it, right? Like you just defer to me. And so there's certainly setting an environment among your staff and among your employees to say, hey, this is an environment where you can speak up, where I am listening, and where I want your collaboration. And so I think that setting up that dynamic to where the leader actually hears from people, right? And understands, and like we were talking about before, is able to suspend your own bias, to put yourself in their shoes, to exercise some perspective taking, some cognitive empathy, where I'm actually thinking and trying to see from your perspective, right? This is something we could really use in America, I think, right? So trying to see from your perspective. And so it's more collaborative. And in that, people don't just have buy-in at that point, they're co-owners, right? They're co-owners in the organization. It's not just they bought into your ideas, they've actually come up with the ideas. They've helped formulate what it is that your plan is and your strategy. And instead of just merely delegating, you empower people, right? And the difference there is you're completely, when you empower someone, you completely expect them to make mistakes, right? I empower you to go forth and do this, make mistakes, mess up, and we're going to learn from that. And that's the next point, right? It's not just constructive criticism, it's learning. And that's to say that I value you, I value what you do for this organization. And if you made that mistake, guess what? Probably any of us could have made that mistake. So let's all learn from it. Right? Let's all learn from this collaboratively. And I think in a complex environment where, it's not the simple input equals output, where you get input and quite frankly, you're not really sure what the output might be, right? You need that. You need a clearer picture of the problems that you're up against, right? The different perspectives, the more nuance that you can see in the problem, the better off you are. And then quite frankly, it lends itself to a lot more options that you have to come up against that problem, right? A lot more options for making things right again, or for taking advantages, of opportunities in the future, creating opportunities in the future, things that you may not have imagined. You think about Netflix, right? At Blockbuster's probably, they made this conference table leadership model, right? Where they have some really good ideas and they've had great ideas for a really long time. But the environment's changing, they didn't recognize it, right? Maybe somebody did. Maybe somebody at the table recognized it, right? And wouldn't it have been great if they had a roundtable leadership approach to where that input gets taken into account, right? And now they're able to adapt and to flex and to be able to survive in their business. That didn't happen. I think that happens to a lot of organizations at different levels and in different ways and in different levels of severity as well. But certainly, we operate, especially at higher echelons, in a very complex environment where things change pretty often, and it's dynamic. And why would we constrain ourselves to only what we know and what we think when we have so much intellectual firepower around us, that we could bring in? And so, leadership effectiveness, right? That's where we started this conversation. I think it's understanding where you are, right? Am I in a simple environment? Can I afford to be like a desk leader, or am I at a point where, I deal with a lot of complexity, and perhaps I need to take more of a round table leadership perspective, so that I'm able to deal with the complexity within the environment more effectively.
One of the greatest gifts I've ever received was when I arrived at the Air Force Academy, being a civilian professor, and highly structured, highly competitive environment, and how many leaders, how many coaches wanted to learn more about influence, wanted to learn more about persuasion, wanted to learn more about collaboration. And so it's been out there for over 25 years. We know what the answers are, but it's just a matter of taking the time to do it. It's managing impulse control of stepping back into that authoritarian role, right? And say, well, wait a minute, let's move back and empower these people, because they're smart people, right? And this is the other thing that the leaders and the coaches at the Air Force Academy knew, is that the cadets were the brightest people there. All right, so let's bring them in, right? And one of the habits, talk about formation, is that it's highly structured and highly competitive, right? And cadets are trained to do what they're told to do, just like you said in the beginning of the interview, right? But when you empower them, right, and say, well, by just saying, well, what do you think about this? It just provides so much freedom, that the empowerment is just oozing out of them.
Absolutely.
And so the human capital is just, exponentially ignited.
Yeah, and that's something we didn't even talk about, is that when you feel empowered, there's a lot more job satisfaction, right? You enjoy coming to work in an environment where you know that your voice matters.
Yeah, you're valued.
Absolutely.
So what's the old quote? For 25 years you paid me, for my back and my hands, but when you could have had my brain for free.
Right.
All right. So
I think there's another aspect from that. We talk a lot about diversity and surrounding yourself with a diverse staff, and I think that's important. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's worthless if you're not able to hear them, right? And if you have this idea that like, I have all the good ideas and let me just tell you about them and I expect your buy-in, it doesn't really matter if you have a diverse staff or not, right? If I have a diverse staff and I'm able to listen to them, now I get different perspectives, right? I get to hear about things that I never would have thought about before. Like you're talking about bringing in the cadets, the young people who have different ideas than us old farts. Like that's important. That's important. It's a perspective that we need to listen to. But how often would we, right? How often do we defer to someone, or allow someone, or empower someone that's that much junior to us, right? But boy, we could really learn from them and benefit from that if we're able to listen to the diversity within our staff, I think.
And it just kind of reminds me of a comic strip where, an authoritarian leader is being convinced that he should, bring in, be more inclusive, right? And then the next pain is, is that he's just talking over everybody, even though they brought in this really diverse crew. All right, is that habit has been formed, and it's not going to break just because of you bring in a diverse crew. So,
Right.
Let me ask you, who were your leadership role models while you were being conditioned, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I tell you, I'm extremely blessed. I've had so many great leaders through my career, and really through my life. And like a lot of people would start off with their parents, and I'm the same. My parents are amazing. I mean, not only just from a standpoint of displaying outstanding character and integrity, but they really, like, they empowered me. And they allowed me to mess up, and they continued to believe in me and support me, growing up. And I think that's important. I really do. And I certainly had that, and that was wonderful. And that's something that I think is indicative of a lot of the what I would consider the best leaders that I've had, or people that have empowered me. And I know it wasn't just me, right? It was everyone else. Now, obviously, I recognized it more when they were empowering me, but they were the kind of people that empowered their people and allowed them to make mistakes and continued to support them, right? And supporting them through those mistakes, and not just discounting them or disregarding them or shoving them to the side because they made mistakes. And I think that's really important. And I think about my first squadron. Donk Strasburger was my Donk, not his given name, right? It's his call sign. A-10 squadron commander, outstanding. And I was a rookie in the A-10, not doing great, and he gave me an opportunity to go on and to fly A-10s after. It's not a given, right? But he certainly gave me that opportunity. I know Steve Wirtz was Army colonel that I worked for when I was on staff in Korea. He empowered me. He said, "All right, you've got some good ideas here. I'm going to let you present these to the generals." And quite frankly, a lot of them were kind of harebrained ideas, and I got debriefed on them from time to time. But he allowed me to work through that, right? And he wasn't afraid to go before the generals with this major, that has a harebrained idea. And he allowed me and empowered me to present those ideas and to take the licks for it, right? And even here at the War College, I'm felt very supported by my boss, Admiral retired Dean Klein, Peg Klein. And she's allowed me to operate here, and empowered me in the position that I'm in. And it's just I've enjoyed that, right? I really enjoy that. And so from a leadership perspective, certainly, and we just talked about it, when you empower people, they enjoy coming to work, right? And you get a lot more out of them. Um, and I think, that's something that I've been blessed to receive, and it's certainly a lesson to me, for, leadership principles and leadership style is to support people, empower them, and help them to continue to pursue their dreams and to continue to rise in leadership challenges.
I think that's such an important point for, all the listeners out there, because, every leader will say something, well, that's not the way we do it here, or this place is different. And so when you hear, a senior officer from the military talk about empowerment and freeing your people to make mistakes, I think that's really valuable, because that's really the only way you're going to get the best out of people. And if you have such a narrow margin of error, one, your strategy is not right. Okay. And then two, your confidence is way down, because perfectionists don't perform well under pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are unrecoverable mistakes, right? And it's probably worth acknowledging that, because I can hear that, I can hear that running through some people's minds as they listen to this, right? There are mistakes that you can make that you just can't recover from. Those are not the mistakes that we're talking about here, right? Those are, the do or die kind of situations, but certainly, when we step back, sometimes things are probably a little less serious than we think, right? And probably a little less critical than we think. Now, those decisions do exist, right? And maybe we hold them for ourselves as opposed to delegating them, those really, critical, non-redeemable type decisions. But we also need to understand that there's a whole lot of wiggle room in there, right? And I love what you just said about maybe your strategy is messed up if there's not enough, margin for error in there. Yeah, so I think we do need to step back and say, hey, you know what, I can probably recover from this, and there's value in allowing someone to mess up here, right? I don't need to be perfect right there.
Yeah, and your perspective from the military, where there those what was the term you used? Irredeemable mistakes.
I think I've used two or three different terms, but yeah, that's it.
Well, when you talk about that, you're talking in terms of lives.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so there's no greater consequence than that.
Right.
And that's something that I think that a lot of other industries don't really realize, is that they look at things, as do or die. And it's not that way. Right. Yeah. There is a margin of error. Right. And so many times leaders will just narrow that margin of error to such a degree that that they basically hamstrung themselves, only because through their own mindset, through their own belief system. And then they infect the rest of the organization with that. So I think that's a really valuable point that you made, that yes, there are irredeemable mistakes, and the leader can be there to, provide a safety net and to spot that person so they don't make that mistake. Right? Yeah. But in the end, there's no greater irredeemable mistake than what the military has to face. And when a leader recognizes that they are the person responsible for losing lives, right? There's no greater responsibility than that. So I think that just puts a sobriety on leadership that most people don't, aren't aware of, or aren't certainly talking actively about. But obviously, you guys in the military do all the time.
Yeah, we do. And it's a hard thing to understand that there are times when you may have to send people into that situation, right? And there are situations that, you look at an opportunity versus risk, right? And sometimes, maybe that's not it seems like a very, kind of, I guess, disinterested way of stating it. But there's a lot in that, right? That when we weigh risk, we have to really consider what it is we're going after, right? Is this worth it? Is this worth the lives that may be spent? And those are the decisions. Those are the tough decisions that, and do we make mistakes? We do. right? I mean, no doubt about it. We make mistakes in those, and at times there may be lives that are spent that maybe shouldn't have been. And there's a lot of complexity and in combat, a lot of things that are just completely unpredictable, and it's almost unavoidable. But to the largest extent possible, yeah, I mean, those are the situations where you really want to measure your actions, and make sure that the risk really is worth the reward, strategically, for the price you're paying for.
All right, so let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum. How do you relax or celebrate?
I think it's great that you asked this question. Especially we think about relaxing. It's hard for leaders to relax sometimes, because burdens that come with leadership. And you're thinking about your people, and you're thinking about there's a lot going on, and especially here in the COVID environment. One, I think there's extra pressure on your people, right? There's more going on. There's more fears. There's life difficulties that perhaps weren't there before. And another aspect of it is a lot of us are working from home, right? And so when do you turn it off? When do you relax? When's my workday done? It's one thing to walk out of the office, shut the door, and go get in the car and drive home, and have maybe that 10, 15, 20-minute drive to decompress and to start to relax and get back into normal mode. My commute now is to walk down the steps, right? Like I walk down the hall, down the steps, and I'm in my living room. It's hard to know, and that's something that early on during this pandemic, it was difficult. I felt like I was working all the time. I just didn't know when to stop, and it's something I've had to be more intentional about, right? That like at a certain time every day, the computer's off, we're unplugged, we're sitting down, we're having dinner together as a family. And so I think it's being intentional with the relaxation. My wife and I will go out for a walk, so I'll just step away, we'll go for a walk. And I think it's important to do that. Celebration, my philosophy is celebrate early and often, right? And this is, I think that's important. It's actually, John Cotter's 8 steps of change model. One of his steps is to create short-term wins, right? It does build momentum, and it tells your team, hey, we're doing something important here. We're accomplishing something, and so even here in my house, we do that. Like, hey, we got all the laundry done. High five, right? Like these are victories that we can celebrate. Yes. And so I think it's important, to keep morale up, especially in times like this. To keep morale up, to celebrate even the small victories.
Yeah, and I think that
when you can.
That leads to just the assumption of entitlement. Is that when leaders don't celebrate those small victories, there's a sense of entitlement of those victories, and that can really lead to problems down the road. But it also, is a certain lens into their character as far as who they are and what they're all about. So I'm a big believer.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a great point. By celebrating the victory, in some way, we're expressing thankfulness, right? That we're thankful for that we're gracious for the victory, as opposed to just victory, right? Celebrating it as I think a important part of being thankful and understanding there's not a given, right? That this is worthy of celebration.
Exactly. Right. And people made valuable contributions to it, and they should be recognized as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I want to reiterate that Colonel Hill's views presented do not reflect the official positions of the Naval War College, Department of Navy, or the Department of Defense. Ryan, is there anything else that you want to add before we close this out?
No, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on your show here.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and it's always great catching up with a Zoomie. All right, everybody, thanks so much for listening to the X Factor podcast. We'll see you next time.